She whispered, "If you stay quiet, nobody will ever know." And just like that, my world shifted between silence and desire. A secret began to grow. The rain had just started when I pushed open the door of the little cafe on the corner, an unexpected refuge from the cold drizzle outside. The scent of fresh coffee and warm bread wrapped around me like a gentle embrace, soft jazz humming quietly through the speakers. I was alone, the world feeling too loud and chaotic beyond these walls, but inside, everything seemed to slow down. She was there before me, seated by the window, framed by the soft gray light of the afternoon. She didn't look up as I entered, but the way the light caught her hair, the faint crease of a smile at the corner of her lips, drew my eyes in. She was older than me, undoubtedly, but it wasn't just the years. It was the quiet confidence she carried, as if she belonged in this gentle stillness like a secret only she knew. I found a seat nearby, pretending to read the worn pages of a book I barely understood, but my attention kept drifting back to her. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup with such delicate care that I imagined I could feel the warmth from across the room. She wore a soft cream sweater, its fabric hugging her silhouette with graceful ease, and I noticed the way her eyes, sharp yet tired, lifted toward mine for just a fraction of a second before she looked away. It was that glance that unsettled me, or maybe it was the sense that behind those eyes, there was a story she wasn't ready to tell. I wanted to ask her name, to know what thoughts lingered there, but something about her held me back, a boundary invisible yet palpable. Then unexpectedly she spoke. Her voice was low, calm, like a quiet secret meant only for me. "You look like you could use a break," she said, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink to just the two of us. I nodded, unsure how to respond, but the simple kindness in her tone reached something inside me I didn't know was waiting. She shifted slightly, the faint scent of jasmine and something more grounded, earthy, drifting toward me. Her eyes softened, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might say more. But instead, she just smiled again, that same small, knowing smile, and turned her gaze back to the rain outside. I wanted to hold on to that moment, the quiet, the unspoken connection, as if it could shelter me from the noise of the world. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, a slow unfolding of trust and understanding that would take time to grow. As I sipped my coffee, I realized that what drew me wasn't just her beauty or mystery, but the way she seemed to hold space for silence, for waiting for something unhurried. And maybe that was the start, not with grand declarations, but with a glance, a shared breath, and the quiet promise of a secret yet to be told. The bookshop was smaller than I expected, rows of weathered shelves packed tightly together, their wooden frames smelling faintly of dust and ink. The air held that special hush that makes you feel like you're stepping into someone's personal world, where every word on every page carries weight. It was late afternoon, the light through the narrow windows casting long, lazy shadows that stretched across the floor. I hadn't planned to run into her again so soon, but there she was, leaning casually against a shelf, a thick novel in one hand, the other tucked into the pocket of her coat. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, her eyes caught mine with that same spark of quiet knowing. The city outside was busy and loud, but in this tiny, hidden corner, it was as if the rest of the world had disappeared. She stepped closer, just enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from her, a soft contrast to the crisp chill in the air. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, and I had to lean in to catch her words. "If you stay quiet," she said, her breath brushing my ear, "nobody will ever know." The sentence lingered, heavy and delicate all at once. It wasn't a demand or a warning, but an invitation, an offer of a secret kept safe in silence. Her eyes searched mine for a response, and in that moment, I understood that whatever we were beginning was meant to be hidden from the world, at least for now. I wanted to ask what she meant, to unravel the mystery in her words, but the softness in her tone and the vulnerability in her gaze made me hesitate. Instead, I simply nodded, the unspoken agreement settling between us like a fragile thread connecting two distant hearts. She handed me a book, a collection of poems bound in soft leather, the pages worn at the edges. Our fingers brushed briefly, the contact light but electric. I felt the sudden thrum of something deep inside, a mix of anticipation and caution. Around us, the quiet murmur of other patrons and the subtle creak of the wooden floor faded into the background. The world felt suspended, waiting for something unsaid to unfold. Her presence was comforting yet elusive, like a half-remembered dream. I noticed how her eyes held a flicker of both hope and fear, as if she was guarding something precious but fragile. The thought made me want to protect her, even though I barely knew her. As she turned back to the shelves, I caught the faint scent of jasmine again, mingling with the crispness of the paper. The moment was fleeting, but it left a warmth inside me that refused to fade. Walking away, the book in my hands felt heavier, not just in weight, but with the promise of what might come next. The unspoken agreement between us had opened a door to something unknown, fragile, and entirely new. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. Our meetings became less about words and more about presence. There was a rhythm to it, a silent complicity that grew stronger with each encounter. It wasn't that we avoided talking. Rather, what remained unspoken carried more weight than any conversation could. We would find ourselves in the same quiet spots. The corner table of a nearly empty cafe, a bench by the riverside where the breeze played softly through the trees, or the library's secluded alcove where the scent of old paper mingled with faint traces of her jasmine perfume. Each place became a canvas for our shared silence, a space where vulnerability could slowly unfold without fear or expectation. I noticed how our glances lingered just a moment longer, how our hands brushed with a familiarity that wasn't quite accidental. One afternoon, she passed me a small note folded carefully from a scrap of paper, her fingers barely touching mine. The message was simple, just a few words scribbled in neat handwriting, but was enough to make my heart race. The physicality of those touches, small, deliberate, yet so understated, felt like a secret language between us. Her palm against mine was warm and steady, grounding me in a world that often felt chaotic and overwhelming. There was no rush, no pressure, only the slow unfolding of a connection that deepened with every quiet gesture. Yet beneath the comfort, I sensed a tension, a hesitance rooted in both of us. She carried the weight of years I hadn't lived through, the experience of a life rich with memories and perhaps regrets. I, in turn, wrestled with my own uncertainty, how to navigate the uncharted territory of feeling drawn to someone so different from me, and what that meant for the fragile balance we were building. Our shared silences often spoke louder than words. The way she looked at me, soft but searching, made me feel seen in ways I hadn't expected. I could almost feel the steady pulse of her heart through the space between us, steadying my own nerves. There was a moment when, without thinking, I reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The lightness of my touch surprised me, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes softened, and for a fleeting second, the barriers between us seemed to melt. I found myself craving those moments, not just the touch, but the quiet intimacy that came with them. It was the kind of closeness that didn't need grand declarations, only the steady presence of two souls slowly learning to trust each other. And so we continued, two people bound by unspoken understanding and a shared secret that neither dared to name aloud yet. In that silence, I realized that sometimes the deepest connections grow not from words, but from the spaces between them, filled with meaning, promise, and the gentle warmth of companionship. The rain had returned that evening, soft and steady against the pavement, blurring the city lights into glowing halos. We found ourselves beneath the muted glow of a street lamp, the world around us hushed, wrapped in the quiet intimacy that only a rainy night can bring. She was quieter than usual, her usual confident composure softened by something fragile, almost tentative. The crisp chill in the air did little to hide the warmth radiating from her, as she shifted closer, her shoulder brushing gently against mine. It was a small touch, but it felt like an anchor amid the swirling thoughts in my mind. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel the tension in her fingers, how they curled slightly, like she was holding back something she wasn't sure she wanted to share. Then, with a breath that seemed to gather all her courage, she began to speak. Her voice was low and uneven, like a melody interrupted halfway through. She told me of a past marked by choices that had left their marks, of loneliness that sometimes felt like a shadow she couldn't shake. It wasn't a story filled with drama or sorrow, but one of quiet regret and the heavy cost of holding up a brave front for so long. As she spoke, I noticed how her eyes searched mine, not for pity, but for understanding. Her words unfolded gently, like petals reluctant to open but yearning for the light. I listened, every inch present, sensing the delicate weight of her vulnerability. There was a moment when her voice caught, a soft tremor that betrayed the strength she usually wore like armor. I reached out instinctively, my hand brushing against hers, fingers intertwining in a silent promise of steadiness. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned just slightly into the touch, as if it offered a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. The rain whispered around us, and the city's distant sounds softened to a gentle hum. In that fragile space, the usual barriers between us dissolved. I could feel the quiet steadiness of her heartbeat beneath my palm, slow but steady, grounding me in the reality of this moment. It struck me then how remarkable it was to see someone so strong reveal the cracks in their armor, to share a part of themselves so tenderly and without pretense. It was a gift and a risk all at once. We stayed there, silent and close, the world outside continuing on its relentless pace while time slowed just for us. The ache of her past seemed to settle into something softer, less sharp, held in the quiet company we kept. For the first time, the age gap between us felt less like a distance and more like a bridge, one built from shared humanity, from the courage it takes to be truly seen. That night, beneath the rain and the street lamps' glow, something shifted. It wasn't a grand confession or a sweeping gesture, but a quiet opening of hearts, an invitation to step into a deeper, more vulnerable connection. And in that vulnerability, I found a profound closeness that words could never fully capture. The night wrapped around us like a soft cloak, the city lights flickering in the distance as we walked side by side along the quiet streets. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of damp leaves and something more elusive, an undercurrent of anticipation neither of us dared to voice. We moved slowly, the world reduced to the steady rhythm of our footsteps and the subtle sounds of the night. Somewhere between the cool air and the muted glow of street lamps, the space between us began to shrink, almost imperceptibly, but enough to notice. Our hands brushed, once lightly as if by accident. A spark flared, brief and electric, sending a warmth that traveled from my fingertips straight to my heart. Neither of us pulled away, and when it happened again, longer this time, the silence between us grew thick with meaning. Her gaze caught mine, steady and searching, holding the kind of quiet intensity that made my breath catch. There was something unspoken in her eyes, desire wrapped in hesitation, hope mingled with doubt. I wanted to reach out, to close the gap fully, but the weight of our unspoken truths held me back. Age was an invisible barrier, felt more deeply than seen. It lingered in the cautious way we approached each other, in the hesitant pauses and the unvoiced questions. Society's whispers echoed faintly in the back of my mind, but they were distant compared to the quiet pull between us, an undeniable connection that transcended the lines others might draw. As we walked, the cool breeze tousled her hair, and I found myself wanting to brush it back gently, to feel the softness of her strands between my fingers. Instead, I kept my hands to myself, savoring the tension that built with each stolen glance, each shared breath. There was a moment when she stopped and looked up at the sky, the faintest smile touching her lips. "It's strange," she said softly, How the night can hold so much without saying a word. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. It was the silence between us that spoke loudest, filled with yearning, questions, and the fragile hope of something more. Her presence was like a quiet flame, steady, warm, and mesmerizing, and I felt drawn to it, even as I wrestled with the uncertainty of what that flame might mean for both of us. The world around us seemed to fade, leaving only the two of us caught in that delicate balance between friendship and something deeper, more charged. I wanted to tell her everything, the way my heart quickened when she was near, how every brush of her hand felt like a promise. But the words stayed lodged in my throat, fragile and vulnerable, waiting for the right moment to be spoken. For now, we let the silence carry us, the slow unfolding of desire wrapped in restraint and respect. And in that quiet night, beneath the stars and the city's gentle hum, the space between us was alive, with possibility, longing, and the tender stirrings of love yet to fully bloom. It happened suddenly, an accidental closeness that neither of us planned, but both felt the weight of immediately. We were in her small apartment, a space that smelled faintly of lavender and worn books, the soft glow of a lamp casting shadows that danced across the walls. The air felt thick with things left unsaid, tension simmering beneath the surface like a quiet storm. I had reached for a book on the shelf, and our hands brushed again, this time with a lingering touch that sent a ripple of warmth through me. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes met mine, dark and searching, filled with a mix of fear and longing. The room seemed to hold its breath as the distance between us vanished. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke, breaking the fragile silence. "I'm scared," she confessed softly, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Scared of what people will say, of the judgment, of being seen like this." Her words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. I stepped closer, feeling the pulse of her uncertainty. "I don't care about what they think," I said honestly, my voice steady but gentle. "I care about you, about us." The truth of those words felt like a release, both terrifying and freeing. She swallowed hard, a tear tracing a slow path down her cheek. I reached out, cupping her face with the tenderness I'd been holding back for so long. My thumb brushed lightly over her skin, tracing the curve of her cheekbone, and I felt the subtle catch in her breath. "I've admired you from afar," I continued, "the strength you carry, the way you face the world, and this connection between us, it's real. It's not something I want to hide anymore." There was honesty in my confession, but also a deep respect for the complexity of what we were sharing. Her eyes searched mine again, as if trying to find the courage she needed. "It's not just the world," she whispered. "It's me. Sometimes I wonder if I'm ready for this, to let someone in, to risk everything." I shook my head softly. "You don't have to be perfect or fearless. I want to be here for all of it, the doubts, the fears, and the moments in between." My hand lingered on her cheek, a silent promise of patience and understanding. The tension in the room shifted, no longer a weight to fear, but a bridge we were willing to cross together. She leaned into my touch, her lips barely grazing my palm, and for the first time, the silence between us felt like an invitation, not a barrier. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the fragile moment unfolding in that small apartment. And inside, we took the first steps toward something that had been quietly growing, an honest, vulnerable connection that was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. We didn't need to say more. The warmth in her eyes and the gentle squeeze of her hand said everything. In that breaking point, we found a beginning. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a golden glow that warmed the room like a gentle embrace. We sat side by side on the worn couch, the quiet stillness between us no longer heavy with unspoken fears, but filled with a comforting peace. Her fingers found mine naturally, their familiar warmth grounding me in a way that words never could. Our hands intertwined, each movement slow and deliberate, as if savoring the simple truth of being together without pretense or haste. There was no need for grand declarations or sweeping promises. What we shared was quietly profound, a connection built on trust, respect, and a tenderness that had grown through moments of vulnerability and silence. I looked at her, at the gentle curve of her smile, the soft light catching in her eyes, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She was older, yes, with a life full of stories etched softly in the lines of her face, but that only deepened the beauty of what we had found. The age gap, once a silent shadow lingering in the background, now felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge, an emblem of the different paths that had led us to this shared space. It wasn't about the years between us, but about the moments we chose to spend together carefully and with intention. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, a quiet drum that echoed my own. In that simple gesture, there was an unspoken promise that whatever the future held, we would face it side by side. We spoke softly, sharing fragments of dreams and hopes that had once seemed too fragile to voice aloud. Her laughter, light and genuine, filled the room, breaking the last traces of hesitation that lingered between us. There was a tenderness in every glance, every touch, the brush of her fingers against my cheek, the lingering squeeze of her hand as she settled closer. It was a language of affection spoken without words, a dance of closeness that felt both new and deeply familiar. Outside, the world continued in its rush, but inside this quiet space, time seemed to slow. The secret we had kept was no longer a weight or a risk, but a sacred trust, a shared sanctuary where age, judgment, and fear held no power. I realized then that love, in its most beautiful form, is not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is the quiet understanding between two souls, the gentle assurance that you are seen, accepted, and cherished exactly as you are. As the morning light grew brighter, so did the warmth between us. It was a beginning, but also a home, a place where silence could speak volumes, and where two hearts, separated by years but united in feeling, could finally rest together. And with that quiet resolution, our story found its peace, soft, steady, and beautifully whole.